So it was late 2018 when I discovered the Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas in the Unsealed FBI files. Pretty much everyone that you've seen talk about that, got it from that starting point of me sharing that. As far as I can tell, there was nothing on the internet about it before that. But starting about maybe 2 years ago, I started to get messages from people saying, "Hey, Ben, you talk about this stuff all the time. Have you ever heard of the Adam and Eve story?" And, the initial reaction is, you heard about it because I found it. But in general, what it is it means that people are taking this and running with it, and it's got legs of its own. It's not just based on me trying to cram these things down people's throats. People are taking it and running with it, and I think that's a great thing. It does come with
running into some other stuff too, right? Like it's kind of at this nexus where it's really running into Randall's work, and it runs into this lost civilization stuff, and it seems like all that stuff is sort of like coming to a head right now.
And it's because they have the same kind of frustrations that I have, where they opened their mind a little bit, decided, hey, I'm going to take a look at this information and see what I think of it. And they realized, oof, it's relatively bulletproof. We've got a disaster about to happen on this planet. And, their department heads don't want to hear about it. Their colleagues down the hall in their departments don't want to hear about it. And so they're like, what do we do? What do we do? All right, well, let's find who does want to hear about it, who is talking about this, who does have the freedom to actually, say whatever they feel like, who doesn't need to read a script, who doesn't have to wear a muzzle. Let's see how we can get this information out. And I've been shocked at how many people who have a lot to lose. I mean, you've got a $900,000 contract with NASA. You've got a lot to lose. Even if you've got tenure at a university, you can lose it. And so it's amazing. These people who are being cautious, but at the same time, these are the experts, and they are taking a risk to try to help all of us.
It's hard not to ask that right away.
Yeah, because just for the people, because there's probably some people here that haven't been following, and they're like,
Absolutely.
What are these guys talking about?
Absolutely. Well, the simplest word for it is a magnetic pole shift. This is very different than what is recorded on the crustal lines in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. We have one kind of a magnetic reversal that only happens every few 100,000 years, and they call those long Cron magnetic reversals. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is what they playfully refer to as the rapid flips, the very, very short-lived and much more frequent geomagnetic excursions, or mini magnetic pole flips. Those happen about every 6,000 years. The last one was about 6,000 years ago. The one before that about 12,000 years ago, 18,000, 24,000, 30, 36, 42, 48. The cycle's pretty darn good. And you actually have to go back, more than 50,000 years before some of the data is a little harder to see. But even beyond that, the ones they do identify further back in time, 72,000 years ago, 106,000 years ago. If you keep the 6,000 year thing going, it hits these marks perfectly. Basically, every 6,000 years, we have a major change in Earth's magnetic field. It causes a major amount of climate change. It causes a volcanic and earthquake uptick. And they notice that these are the events where the majority of species seem to disappear, if they're going to disappear. And just a quick note on that, so we understand what I mean. There's approximately 14 million known species on the planet. They estimate there could be as many as double that they don't know. And they think that probably 1 or 2 species goes extinct about every single day. Now, in the overall scheme of things, this doesn't really make that much of a difference. because there's on average a species or two that, mutates and comes into being every day. But we go through these periods where maybe that 1 to 2 becomes 30, becomes 60, becomes 100 species. Now, the worst event that we have ever seen among these rapid flips was about 40-something thousand years ago, called Le Champ. About 3 or 4% of the species we know about disappeared. Now, that's obviously not the end of life on Earth, but that is an enormous number. Even though, people hear 3 to 4%, they're like, oh, that's a tiny little. But when we're talking about species on the planet completely disappearing, that's huge. And for the species that didn't die out, that didn't go extinct, anywhere from a 20% to an 80% reduction in the population of those species. So we're talking about a major hit to what they call the biosphere, basically the life on Earth, whether that's birds in the sky, things here on the ground, or marine creatures that live in the water. And we're seeing them accelerate. And so the magnetic poles have already begun to shift. I imagine some of your followers have probably heard about this, that the magnetic poles are actually starting to move. And that's going faster and faster and faster. Coming along with this, and this is what actually makes these so dangerous, the magnetic protection of our planet is weakening. Now, we have more than just an atmosphere, around our planet. We have a magnetic bubble. If the atmosphere is, just right, touching the surface and kind of locked to it, you come out a little bit and there's this magnetic shell acting like a force field of protection. And because all of the scary stuff from space, whether that's solar flare X-rays or plasma from a solar eruption or gamma rays or supernova energy, things like that. All of those things are electromagnetic, which means our magnetic shield helps deflect it and protect our planet. During these rapid geomagnetic excursions, these rapid magnetic pole flips, as that protection weakens, we get more of that space energy coming into Earth, and that has a dramatic effect on almost everything. So, clouds, their formation, how big they get, how much water they hold, how much water they release, what their electric fields look like in terms of lightning, in terms of their spin, when we're talking about tropical storms, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, things like that. Tornado outbreaks have been linked to this electromagnetic energy coming in. How hot it is, how bad is the blizzard, how many hurricanes do you have that year? Do you have an extended period of drought? How much rain is falling per hour? All of these things can be modulated by this electromagnetic energy coming in. That's when they dug down into the sediment there and found the layers where, the top layer is polar fossils, as would be expected, but the next layer is only tropical, polar, tropical, polar, tropical. And it was the data from that mission and the Pentagon meetings, which were run by the RAND Corporation and the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which morphed into the CIA. So the OSS was the predecessor organization to the CIA. It was their finding that during these magnetic pole shifts, something causes the Earth to tilt 90 degrees. This is what causes the great tsunamis. This is why they find layers of polar, tropical, because it tilts 90 degrees and then it goes back. And then it tilts 90 degrees and then it goes back. That was the official pre-CIA Pentagon conclusion, that when these magnetic pole shifts happen, the Earth tilts over like this, tilts 90 degrees. It happens in just one day. It causes the great tsunamis. It causes that different layering they see in the polar region. 20 years later, he's just some random professor, and he's advocating for 7 degrees of tilt that takes 1,000 years. Well, what happened in between when he was leading the science team that said, one day, 90-degree flip? to 1,000 years for 7 degrees? The answer is not that he got some new information or he changed his mind. The answer is you never stop working for the CIA or the OSS in this case. They had already classified everything from Project Nanook that could possibly lead people to these conclusions. They were already funneling money through the National Science Foundation to write debunking studies of this kinds of thing. But the very last thing they had to do, they ordered, and I'm almost positive that this is how it went down. They ordered Charles Hapgood put out a completely nonsense version of this so that we can easily debunk it and we can just call this stuff pseudoscience and no real scientist will take it seriously ever again. The other important thing is they discovered those mammoths frozen in the Arctic with food undigested in their mouths and their stomachs, right? Everybody's heard of the mammoths, but nobody asks the right question. Everybody's like, how do you freeze a mammoth so fast that the food, that chemical digestion stops, just instantly stops? And that's not an uninteresting question, but the better question is, what were they eating? And here's why. They found these things up here, right? They found them in the Arctic Circle. They had to dig them out of 20 to 30 feet of ice, right? We are 12,000 years into a hot interglacial period. These creatures were frozen in the glacial period when it was 10, 20 degrees colder than it is now. If there's 20 to 30 feet of ice there now, 12,000 years into a hot interglacial, it's not like there was a bunch of vegetation growing there in the glacial cycle at the polar region when it was 20 degrees colder. Those things needed to eat 1,000 pounds or more of vegetation a day. The only answer is the Earth was like this. They were eating at mid and low latitude, and then it tilted 90 degrees, and they froze instantly. Because otherwise, there would have been nothing for those massive creatures to eat in the Arctic back in the glacial cycle. Hell, there's nothing for them to eat now. And if it was
the other thing is it gives you a real good head start on an ice sheet. If you have the thing flip, so you have this crazy tsunami that's like say if you have Canada moving north, you'll have all this water coming in from the north, and then you're at the North Pole and it's 30, 40, 50 degrees cold.
Major solar flares can change the rotation of the Earth. And we know that Einstein wrote the foreword for Hapgood's book several years before he died. And so it's not surprising that these two were talking to one another. Einstein was what he says in the foreword is absolutely true. He was 100% convinced the Earth turns over. There's a major crustal displacement causing major tsunamis, causing all kinds of bad stuff. But he couldn't figure out how you actually did it. Like he's like, there's more than enough evidence to suggest that it happens, but how is it happening? I think that it really blows open archaeology in the history of our species to let us really find out everything about Göbekli Tepe, which is why they are trying their hardest to stop that from happening. I think that human civilization has probably risen and fallen a couple of times at least on this planet. Apart from the disaster itself, the closest thing there is to a bad guy in that movie is the heavy-set government guy, right? But he says the most intelligent thing anybody says in that entire film. Do you remember what he said? He said, "What? You just want to tell everyone they're doomed? There'll be anarchy, chaos.